It's been nearly a year since the then Turnbull government established a royal commission into the banking and finance sector. Now, after months of hearings revealed a litany of poor behaviour across the sector, Commissioner Kenneth Hayne is expected to hand down his interim report today. The Commission received close to 10,000 public submissions and held gruelling rounds of public hearings that exposed some of the industry's worst practices. Business reporter David Taylor looks back at some of the Commission's key moments.
The Banking Royal Commission made for distressing viewing at times.
Two of the hardest things you can do when you're suffering from any addiction is to, one, admit you've got a problem, and two, reach out for help.
A Commonwealth Bank customer in the witness box in tears after telling stories of how the CBA encouraged him in his gambling addiction.
Just take a moment, take a big deep breath, and if you want me to stop, I'll stop for a bit.
That's fine.
Witnesses were on the receiving end of hours of carefully crafted questions from some of the best corporate lawyers in the country. It was all too much for the owner of Dover Financial Services, Terry McMaster, taken off in an ambulance after collapsing in the stand. It was hard going for everyone involved.
Ms Perkovic, I do not regard that as answering counsel's question. Please ask the question again. I want you to listen to it and I want you to answer it directly as you can. Please put the question again.
As the Commission hit its stride, each day saw its own jaw-dropping moments. Moments even counsel assisting found hard to swallow. Michael Hodge QC finding out on the spot AMP had tinkered at the board level with an independent review of its practice of providing fees for no service.
And are you saying the board met and approved changes to the report?
If memory serves me, I believe there were other changes as well.
The government, which had originally resisted calls for a royal commission, started talking tough.
This type of behaviour can attract penalties which include jail time. That's how serious these things are.
By now, the damage control was well underway. The AMP's Craig Mellor became the first senior executive to fall on his sword. AMP Chairman Catherine Brenner and 3 other directors were further casualties of a brewing public anger against the financial services sector. National Australia Bank boss Andrew Thorburn took to social media to stem the social bloodletting.
My commitment to you as the CEO of this company on behalf of almost 34,000 people is that we will listen. We will learn and we will get better.
But is it enough to just say sorry? As more and more horror stories came forward, Commissioner Hayne raised the prospect of criminal prosecutions.
Did you think yourself that taking money to which there was no entitlement raised a question of the criminal law?
I didn't.
It was a turning point for the Commission, now roughly 2/3 of the way through one of the biggest ever tests of Australia's financial sector. Still to come, bankers callously putting profits before customers. We heard AMP rebuff claims it was responsible for ensuring its clients were in the best available financial products.
You'd have to ask the client.
I'd have to ask who, sorry?
The client.
And we heard how farmers were forced into receivership and off their properties as sickness and adverse weather conditions wreaked havoc on their profit margins.
They would perceive the money is absolutely wasted. There's a massive destruction of value. And that sits deeply with people, Commissioner.
But perhaps one of the most distressing examples came towards the end. We heard of the sales tactics used by life insurance companies targeting the vulnerable in the hunt for new clients. Freedom Insurance cold-called a 26-year-old man born with Down syndrome to pressure him into buying a life insurance policy he didn't understand and would probably never be able to claim.
OK, so you can choose between 4,000 and 15,000 to leave behind for your loved ones just in case you died. So do you think 10,000 would be enough for you?
I don't mind.
Do you think 10 would be enough to leave behind for them?
Yes.
Beautiful.
The man's father, Grant Stewart, is now calling for an outright ban on unsolicited sales of financial products. That's just one of the many calls for change in the sector, a sector that's been shown to practice both unethical and illegal behaviour for many years, despite being under the full gaze of the regulators.
That's our business reporter, David Taylor, who's been following the Royal Commission closely. Well, the big question is, will these revelations change the future of banking in this country? I'm joined now by Graeme Samuel, Professorial Fellow at Monash University's Business School. He's also a former chairman of the ACCC. Investigative journalist Adele Ferguson. She's a columnist with The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian Financial Review, and she's long investigated bad behaviour by the banks. Also on the line, banking expert Martin North. He's the principal of independent data crunching firm Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to you all on RN Breakfast. Adele Ferguson, initially, critics feared that the Royal Commission may provide more theatre than real action. They said it wasn't necessary, yet hearing after hearing, that criticism has been well and truly proven wrong, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yes. It's been shocking what we've heard. I think one of the most disturbing things is the regulators who've been missing in action. They've had the power to do things, they've known what's gone on, and they've turned a blind eye.
Graeme Samuel, you served as the chairman of the Consumer Watchdog until 2011, 2 years before the Senate inquiry into the corporate watchdog. Did you have a sense back then of how many consumers were being mishandled by the banks?
I don't think anyone in the community, with exception perhaps of the regulators, had any sense of the shocking revelations that we've seen. We've got to remember this, that Commissioner Hayne has got a lot more information than has been revealed in the 4 sessions of 2 weeks of what are called cameo trials, if you like. He has a lot more information, and that will come forth, I think, in the interim report and then ultimately in the final report. I don't think anyone really appreciated how shocking the misconduct and the illegal conduct has been and has been revealed.
Martin North, as we heard in that package, there was shock when it emerged that the banks had charged fees for no service to thousands of customers. Would you say that that was the turning point for our finance sector?
Well, I think it's one of them, but essentially it's shone a light on poor culture and driven by, I think, greed and profit at the cost of customers. And it's that balance which is so out of kilter. So it's really time now to think about shifting the dial. That was a turning point, but I think, to be honest, people within the industry have known about this for a number of years. So this is, in a way, not new news.
Graeme, the persistent theme to emerge in the first round of the hearings was one of conflicted remuneration. Can you remind us what that is and what problems the Commission's identified around that?
Yes, and look, this is almost too obvious in many respects. See, where you've got remuneration, where people are incentivised to engage in misconduct or unethical or even illegal activities, such as selling dud insurance policies that can't be claimed upon, or alternatively, put it in a double negative, where the remuneration packages are structured such as not to disincentivise bad conduct, illegal conduct. You've got to wonder what remuneration committees and boards are really thinking at the time. Remuneration ought not to be structured in a way that says to people in an organisation, you are paid more to do things that frankly are improper, illegal or unethical.
It goes to that point that Martin makes about culture. Adele, it's expected that this report is going to scrutinise the banks over the language they use. How much emphasis should be placed on improving the way that the banks communicate with customers? And does that go to part of that issue around conflict?
Well, absolutely. I think, you look at customers are given product disclosure statements which can be 200 pages long, and they're just full of legal language that nobody can understand, and they don't know what they're signing up for. We saw that with life insurance policies, for example, where, it's got medical definitions that were out of date, and people were paying for these policies not knowing that, even if they made a legitimate claim, they'd be knocked back because, buried in the contract are these definitions that can't be paid.
Graeme Samuel, one of the key issues to emerge from the Commission is the power of the regulators. And last month, Scott Morrison announced that ASIC would embed its staff inside Australia's 5 biggest financial institutions under the $70 million plan to improve monitoring of their governance and compliance. Do you think that that will be effective? Does it go far enough?
Yes, I do think it'll be effective, and I'm supportive of James Shipton's determination in that context. I want to go back to a comment you made, and that is the power of the regulators. I don't think it's an issue of power so much. I think the regulators have got the power under the laws that they have at present. That's revealed by the fact that Counsel assisting the Commission has made open finding recommendations that there are literally hundreds of thousands of transactions and activities that, in her opinion, Rena's opinion, are illegal and are appropriate for prosecution. It's not a matter of power, it's a matter of attitude, it's a matter of culture of the regulators themselves. And regulators, I think, have to understand that they cannot be captured by industry, that they need to enforce the law and conduct their remit, which is to enforce the law without fear or favour, that they should not feel the need to be liked by the industry that they are regulating. There's so much about the culture of the regulators that is very, very important. Now, all the evidence to date suggests to me that James Shipton understands that culture well and that will be imbued deeply into ASIC. There's a big change, a big turnaround required as far as ASIC's concerned. And one of the things that I sort of shake my head in bewilderment is to say what was going on through this period where ASIC knew or had the capacity to know about this illegal activity but didn't do anything about it. Negotiating media releases, for heaven's sake. Negotiating sort of settlements of a minimal amount. Bare wet lettuce slaps over the wrist for blatantly illegal conduct. Something was fundamentally wrong.
There's a culture issue,
I'm looking
Graeme.
forward to changing the process with ASIC.
Graeme, there's an issue of culture that you talk about, but it was also about resourcing, wasn't it?
In part, but it's also a question of the focus of the resources. And if the resources can be focused towards dealing with the most egregious misconduct and you've got limited resources, then that's what you should be doing. And it certainly is the approach that we took at the ACCC, which is to focus on the egregious misconduct, not on just the simple, easy issues that might otherwise be dealt with.
Martin North, what do you expect the interim report exactly to recommend?
Well, I hope that it will go beyond just the legal issues, which I think are quite clear, to touch on some of the more structural issues. I think our financial sector has got too big. It's too complex. I think there are big questions about how to disconnect advice from delivery of service and across the various product portfolios from mortgages and financial advice and those things. I think this is a once-in-a-generation chance to set up our financial system to actually benefit Australia. At the moment, unfortunately, Australia Inc. is paying way too much for the services it gets. The structures are wrong. And therefore, I hope that it will look beyond the immediate legal issues to some of those broader structural and policy issues.
Adele, what are you expecting from today's report?
I think they're going to look at conflicted remuneration. They're going to look at a lot of things, responsible lending. They also need to look at compensation because the banks have very opaque compensation schemes. ASIC put out a report the other day saying that from the time of a breach to the time of a first payment of remediation can take an average of 6 years. It's just not good enough. And you don't know whether it's a low-ball compensation payment anyway. So we really need to address this whole compensation scheme that the banks are doing.
And Graeme, what about the prospect of criminal charges? How likely is that?
Well, I hope it's very likely. We've got to remember this, that when you deal with a corporation or with officers of a corporation that have engaged in misconduct and the penalty is financial. Financial causes a bit of pain, but it's fairly short-lived. The prospect of a time in jail ought to be for those that are engaging in this conduct a major deterrent, a major process that says, I got an awful lot at risk here, not just reputation, not just a financial balance in a bank account. What I've got at risk here is potentially freedom and a criminal record that will sit on my record for the rest of my life.
Martin North, we've seen some proactive steps taken by the banks to improve their public image. There have been some high-profile resignations, there's been public apologies, there's been tightening of lending standards. What are the banks going to have to do to restore trust in the sector?
I think they're going to have to do a whole lot more than just a few well-chosen words and some marginal changes at the edge. This is fundamentally about how the banking system is remunerated, how targets are set, how people are actually serviced. And here's the thing, at the moment, customers and the banks themselves are almost set in opposition to each other. But the good news is, if you actually think about customers as being effectively the fundamental DNA that makes your business work and build your organisation around that and build the culture around it, there is a significant opportunity to change the game. The question to me is whether those in the system are able to break out of it sufficiently to be able to play that new game.
Adele, what do you think? Are they going to be able to break out of that new game?
They're really going to have to do a lot of work because this is systemic legalised theft that's been going on, and they have to change their culture and, change the structure of the bank, change the remuneration and, put customers first.
Based on what we've seen, do you think they have the capacity to do that?
Well, not at the moment. They've got to do a lot more than what they're saying.
Graeme Samuel, Labor says that the Banking Royal Commission should run longer than its current final reporting date, which is next February. It should travel more widely and give more aggrieved customers a chance to tell their stories. What do you think? Should the Royal Commission be given more time, given that there would also mean, a delay in some of the regulatory changes that might result from these hearings?
Commissioner Hayne will know very, very well whether he needs more time. We need to keep reminding ourselves that what we are seeing is cameo trials, if you like, with these 2 weekly hearings. The Commissioner has a vast amount of information there. I think I read somewhere 70,000 documents, including the confessions that he demanded and received very early on in the piece. So he has a lot of information, and I'm hoping that what will flow out of that is that he'll be able to say, well, we'll see in today's interim report, that he'll be able to say, I know a lot more than is being revealed by these cameo trials, and I'm in a position to be able to make recommendations as to what ought to be done, both as to regulators and as to the regulated entities that are under his gaze at the present time.
Adele, Ferguson, is there an expectation that we'll see more from the federal government now that the interim report will be tabled today?
Yeah, I think we have to. At the moment, they've been really dragging their heels, saying let's wait until after the final report of the Royal Commission comes out before they do anything. They're really going to start, there's no reason why they can't start making changes to legislation right now.
And finally, Martin North, the last question to you, and that is, what are the consequences if the Royal Commission doesn't lead to better banking services?
Well, people have been taken to the cleaners. The fact is that they've paid way more for financial services products than they should. But the broader economic impact on Australia is huge. Our banks have been remarkably profitable, but not for good reason, simply because they have been effectively be able to milk their customers. So if this is not addressed, then not only do we have people who essentially are getting poor service, but the economic impact on the broader economy is also significant. So this has to be addressed now to set Australia up for the next decade.
Well, let's hope so. Thank you to all of our guests this morning. That's former chairman of the ACCC, Graeme Samuel, investigative journalist Adele Ferguson, and banking expert Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. It's 24 minutes past 8 on RN Breakfast.